Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time for a makeup review. Today we'll focus on blushes, lipsticks, and liners from ESUM Cosmetics. According to their website, this brand forgoes trends and focuses on what they call performance-infused makeup. The question is, does it work well for everyday makeup users too? Or are these things that maybe might be better left to the pros? ESUM claims to offer practical tools and versatile formulations, but are their products also easy and fun to use for those of us who might love makeup but officially have no idea what we're doing? So in the course of today's review, I'll share application footage and swatches so you can get a feel for these products even if you might not be able to test them out in person. I'll also answer what might just be the ultimate question for any product review, and that is, do I think these are good enough to go out and spend my own money on them? Because I don't own these. I had a chance to borrow them from a friend for a couple of weeks so I could test them out. So I'll also share with you whether or not I think I want to purchase these for myself. As always, I'll leave timestamps, links, and information in the show notes so you can easily hop, skip, and jump to whatever's most relevant for you. First, I want to briefly mention what sparked my interest in ESUM Cosmetics in the first place. And the answer is I discovered this brand years ago through their makeup brushes and makeup cases. As someone who travels a lot, I am always interested in quality products in this area, and I have to say ESUM does make some of my favorites. Second, I do feel the need to mention that I am traveling, so I feel a bit like a fish out of water. For example, I am in a new climate at the moment, and so my skin is reacting a little bit differently than I'd like. And I don't have my full skincare arsenal at my fingertips to be able to combat the situation. But in this case, it might not be so much of a disadvantage because, for example, you'll notice in a lot of this application footage, my lips are extremely dry. That is because I have been shoveling snow in extreme cold and my skin isn't liking it. But the advantage to that will be that although it doesn't maybe look aesthetically pleasing, you will be able to see how these lip products perform on skin that is not ideal. And I think that's going to give you a great idea of how they'll perform in any circumstance, because if those lipsticks can look good on these lips, then they can probably look good on anyone's. Now on to the makeup. As a huge fan of palettes in general myself, I thought we would start with those, beginning with the No. 9 Accentuate Blush Palette. This Artistry blush palette contains 5 powder blushes and includes a light neutral pink, a light warm peach, a medium cool pink, a medium warm coral, and a deep cool plum shade, all of which have a matte finish. The color you see in the palette is the color you get on the face, which is not always the case with color cosmetics, so it's good to know that what you're seeing here is what you'll get in the end result. Now that can initially seem intimidating, especially to someone like me who doesn't tend to use many vivid colors. If you've been to my channel before, you're probably already familiar with the fact that I tend to gravitate towards colors that are more native to my own skin tones. In other words, varying shades of beige. Luckily, these blushes are both sheer and buildable, meaning if you just prefer a soft flush or a very subtle veil of color on the cheeks, you can easily do that by just taking a little bit of product, especially using a very fluffy brush, and you can just get that very thin veil on the cheeks. But they're also buildable to an intensity that reminds me a little bit of a John Waterhouse painting. I think it's called The Soul of the Rose, but I feel like you can get a bunch of intensity if you want that as well. The sheerness I get with initial application of this formula using a fluffy brush is a little bit like the quality of watercolor paints, which actually reminded me a lot of my Makeup Forever cream blush palette. Those colors are also quite vivid, but they can be applied in such a sheer layer that it really does look almost like a watercolor painting. And I wished that I had had that palette with me so that I could have tested the two together, because I have a feeling that the two would pair really well. Maybe because they're both professional makeup artist brands? As for the finish, ESUM describes these as matte blushes, which I do agree with, but that matte finish isn't flat or powdery or heavy. I found it to be very skin-like. In fact, I found that when I applied these blushes, they were so lightweight that it was almost as if the powder itself evaporated, leaving only color behind. It was pretty impressive. I did struggle with a little bit of patchiness during application, but I have a feeling that that had more to do with the one and only tiny powder brush I brought with me and less to do with the formula itself. Normally when I'm applying a brush like this with a formula similar to this, this, I would use a larger, fluffier, loosely packed brush. And although this brush is relatively loosely packed, it's not very large. It doesn't have quite enough surface area, and it is a little bit more tightly packed at the bottom than I think I would have liked for a formula like this. So I do have a feeling that the patchiness had to do with the combination of these two things than anything else. When it comes to longevity, I find that generally speaking, powder blushes don't tend to have a whole lot of staying power on my face. And usually I'll get a couple of hours of wear before they fade significantly. That didn't happen so much with these. Although I did see slight fading throughout the day, I got 6 hours of very solid wear from all of these colors. And it was only after the 6-hour mark that I saw significant fading. The packaging is incredibly sleek, and it manages to find that happy balance between being lightweight, so it's easy to travel with, while also feeling hefty enough like it has some real substance to it. Also, like it will be durable. These qualities are great for travelers like myself or clumsy people like myself who like to test gravity a lot. This does seem like it could withstand a couple of accidents. The cover simply slides off, and the palette is ready for use. Then it easily slides back into place with a satisfying click when it closes. The back of this palette also slides off in the same way, so if one were to completely use up one shade of the blush, you could potentially pop out the empty pan and then pop in a new one, simply slide the back cover back on, and you're ready to go. And this convenient packaging is mirrored in all of their palettes, with slight variations for various pan sizes, which brings us to their lip palette. ESUM's number 10 Nuance Artistry Lip Palette contains 15 lip shades that can be used on complexions that are from fair to deep. They claim that it's a hydrating lip formula that's lightweight, pigment-rich, and buildable from a natural stain to full coverage with a semi-matte finish. I have to say, it is not every day that a makeup brand makes claims that are a perfect bullseye description of exactly what their product does. Case in point, watch any of my new makeup videos. We investigate a lot of the claims that the makeup brands are making about their products, and some of them are just plain weird.
Claim 5, sculpts and defines with a dangerously slick shine. As a person who slipped on ice just this morning, I don't want dangerously slick anything.
But that is not the case with ESUM Cosmetics. They get right down to business, giving a refreshingly straightforward take on what their products actually do. And I have to say, it's an accurate list of claims. In my experience, this formula has been very lightweight, feeling like almost nothing on the skin. And it's very pigmented, giving me the coverage I want with just one swipe. At the same time, it's easy to blend and layer, so it's quite buildable. In addition, the finish is a very flattering semi-matte that lets the natural texture of the lips shine through without emphasizing dry patches or lip lines. The one claim I might contest when it comes to these lipsticks is the hydrating aspect. Not because I think these lipsticks are dry. They certainly are not drying. They are very comfortable to wear. But when I hear the word hydrating, my mind often automatically turns to a more satin formula, a creamier formula, or maybe one of those gloss hybrid balms that are out on the market now. Those are all extremely hydrating, and that's kind of what I think of when a product claims to be hydrating, and this isn't that. You'll probably notice in the application footage that my lips are extremely dry. And that's just because it's winter and I've spent hours and hours day after day in the cold, and that exposure has drained my lips of their will to live. That being said, this formula didn't give life to my dry, dehydrated lips, but it did not dry them out either, which I was very thankful for. So I think we have to take that hydrating claim within the context of the semi-matte finish, meaning they're not necessarily going to add a whole lot of life-giving moisture to your lips, but they're not going to dry them out either. The staying power of these was great, especially in combination with the lip liners, but we'll get to those in a second. When it came to the longevity of this, I'm sure that the formula has something to do with it, but I also have a feeling that that's also due to the nature of this format of the lipsticks being in a lip palette. Because I have noticed that I can get more longevity out of any lipstick I own if I really rub that formula into the skin of my lips using either my finger or a lip brush. The format of these lippies really requires that style of application because chances are you're not just going to simply pop out one of the pans and then apply it to your lips. That would just be kind of awkward. The much more organic way of using this format is to simply dip into it with a lip brush or your finger and then spread the product onto the lips, giving you that longevity. Chances are if you have a bullet lipstick, you're just going to sweep, swoop, and then go, which is very convenient, but not the best for longevity. Whereas a format like this, I think just is going to give you more staying power from the get-go. The disadvantage of this format is that it does tend to take a little bit more time and care to apply the product since you have to dip in with a brush and really rub it in. But there are some significant advantages to this format. For example, it's easy to travel with several different lip colors. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space in a bag, but you get all these options. Second of all, it's really easy to create a custom color or an ombre lip combo. Speaking of ombre lips, let's move on to the lip liners because each of these lip pencils comes with 2 different colors within the same color family. I'm only going to briefly discuss the lip liners simply because it looks like most of the colors are out of stock at the moment, and then we'll move on to the eyeliners because it looks like those are currently available. The dual lip pencils have a soft, creamy formula that glides on effortlessly, a satisfying smudge factor before setting down, and they easily offer complete opacity. Despite their soft creaminess, these liners set down quite well, becoming nearly budge-proof. I found that they offered a solid 8 hours of wear, even if they did fade a bit, but even though they smudged a tiny bit on my hand, even after setting down, I never noticed them smudging out of place during the day when I wore them on my lips. The liners also worked very well as a base for the ESUM Lip Palette. When I applied these as a base over the entire lip, I did see significant improvement on the already impressive longevity of the ESUM lip formula. However, there was one disadvantage to using these lip liners as a base, and that is they are ever so slightly drying, although nothing as life-sucking as the liquid lipsticks of old. These are dual pencils, which means they include 2 different lip colors within the same color family for each one, and I do find that the colors are quite logical, so I could actually see myself getting use out of both sides of every single one of the pencils that I tried. The one disadvantage is that the pencil really is only half as large as a normal lip pencil simply because you've got 2 pencils in one. Now, while the 2 colors of the lip pencil are in the same family, the 2 colors in the dual eye pencils are contrasting colors, or not so much contrasting colors, but one is a darkening shade and one is a highlighting shade. I found the complementary dark and light sides of the eye pencils to be quite a smart choice, at least for someone like me, because, for example, the darker shades are all colors that are pretty typical of dark eyeliners in blacks and browns and blues, things like that, purples, and they can be used to define the eye, whereas the lighter highlighting colors match really well with the darker color, but they can be used to really open up different parts of the eye. For example, by using it as an inner corner highlight, maybe adding it to the bottom waterline to really open up the eye a little bit more. And they can even be used as a cream eyeshadow on the lid, which is what I did today. These liners are very soft and malleable, giving you a lot of playtime before setting down, which is great for smudgy, smoked out looks, but it's not ideal when you're, say, trying to use it to get really close to the lash line, because I tend to like to make my eyelashes look thicker by really getting that dark liner in between each lash. So sometimes the liner will get onto my upper waterline, and then the second I blink, boop, it gets pressed onto the lower waterline. And in my case, I have small, deep set eyes, and so I don't like to put dark colors on my lower waterline. It just closes my eyes off too much. But that meant I had to be careful with this darker half of the eye pencil because I couldn't get it too close to that top waterline or else it was gonna transfer. So that wasn't that great. In the longevity in the waterline, I did apply it just to test it, and it didn't last all that well for me. I have watery eyes, but I have a feeling this formula isn't necessarily made for longevity in the waterline. When I tested how well these eyeliners set down, I tested them on the back of my hand, just so I could get a very clear view of what was going on. And the very first time I did the smudge test, I drew them on the back of my hand and let the product set for about 3 minutes. And when I went over it with my finger, they were quite smudgeable. So I decided I would try again, and I drew the lines on my hand and waited 10 minutes for them to set, at which point I went over over it with my finger, and I do have to say they smudged less, noticeably less, but they still smudged. So these aren't the type of eyeliner that completely set down. But because these liners do smudge so well, I thought I would use them as cream eyeshadows. So I also tested them that way, using the darker side to line and contour my eye and the lighter shade to highlight and fill in my lid. And I have to say they are quite malleable, quite smudgeable. They went on very easily and it worked pretty well. That being said, I did use a primer. My favorite current primer is the Urban Decay Primer Potion, and I had to use a primer to do the testing because I have oily, deep set, hooded eyes. Nothing stays put on those lids. Nothing even has a chance unless I prime first. And I have to say the combination of that primer and these made for a pretty solid look. I wore this liner as an eyeshadow for 9 hours, and although the intensity did fade throughout the day, it faded evenly, and the look was still intact with only very slight creasing on one lid, which I have to say is pretty miraculous for my eye shape and skin type. So what are the pros of the dual eyeliners? Well, the colors for one, the dark matte shade combined with the sparkling highlighter shade are great, and the finishes are beautiful. Also, the fact that this formula is so soft does make it very easy to manipulate, to smudge, to blend out. So these can not only be used as eyeliners, but cream eyeshadows or as a base for powder shadows. But that same softness is a double-edged sword because it makes it quite difficult to get a very fine defined line using just these pencils and no fine liner brush. Also, that softness means that they don't set down entirely, and it does make their intensity prone to fading throughout the day. They're also transferable, meaning if you try to put this on the top lash line, there's a possibility it could transfer to your bottom waterline. If that's something you're trying to avoid, this formula might not be the best for you. And the friend that lent these to me for testing also wanted me to expressly mention in this review that she thinks the softness of this formula means that she goes through these pencils much faster than any other pencils she's ever tried. She does like using them, but she finds she has to repurchase them more often than others from other brands. And I can see that, and I think there's two reasons for that. One, the softness of the formula, I can definitely see contributing to that, but two, the fact that it is a dual pencil means that you're only really getting half as much product per side. So if you're not using them equally, it might be a little bit tricky with the repurchasing. When it comes to the dual lip pencils, although these are also very soft and creamy, this formula does seem to have more heft to it. In other words, I feel like these pencils seem to set down faster and have more tenacity to them throughout the day. That does make these less prone to smudging, but I could also see myself going through these faster than any other pencil for the same reasons I listed for the eyeliners. But they also have advantages that are similar to the eye pencils. In other words, that soft, creamy formula is malleable and the colors are very complementary, meaning that you can use one pencil to create a beautiful ombre look or a base for the lip palette, which of course is also very complementary. I feel like these two products fit very well together. So what are the pros and cons of the Artistry Lip Palette from ESUM? Well, the opacity, the blendability, and the wear time of this formula are all great. Plus, I think the selection of colors is great for a variety of skin tones, but as one person using this palette, I feel like the colors are all either great on their own or very useful for me when I'm blending a custom color for myself or creating an ombre lip. I also think the semi-matte finish of this formula is quite flattering. It almost looks as if my lips simply become the color that's in this palette instead of my lips being covered in paint. You don't really see the lipstick, you just see my lips with a little bit of color added. The range of the colors, from cool to warm, from light to deep, from pinks and browns to mauves and purples, is also really useful. The disadvantages of this particular format for the everyday makeup wearer are, of course, that although this format is very convenient for travel and for saving space in a vanity, it's just not as quick and easy to apply because you need a finger or a makeup brush to get the product out and apply it to the lips. Nothing beats the convenience of the bullet format for lipsticks, and as someone who is often applying lipstick on the go, I have to say I do miss the convenience of the bullet in this. Also, I found that I was trying to use these as cream blushes and I was trying to dip my finger into these pans, and that does work. The formula works really well for that, but I did find that the formula in this palette is just sticky enough that if I stuck my finger in to get a little bit of product on my finger and then tap it onto my cheeks, every once in a while the formula would be sticky enough to pull the whole pan with it. And that was always annoying. There was twice when a pan kind of flew across the room that way. And I didn't like that very much. That didn't happen when I used a lip brush though. So I thought about using this palette together with a cheek brush. The only problem is when you look at the size of these pans, I don't have very many cheek brushes that would fit in here. So the format isn't really ideal to use as a cream blush palette, although the formula actually works pretty well. So as great as the formula is, as wonderful as the color selection is, as convenient as the packaging is in so many ways, I have a feeling this is just not going to be for everybody simply because of the reasons I mentioned. It's just not as convenient as a bullet lipstick in certain contexts, and sometimes if I want to use this as a cream blush, the pans can fly out, and that wasn't always ideal. As for the pros and cons of the Artistry blush palette, the colors are true, the finish is beautifully natural, and the longevity of these blushes is right where it needs to be. If you enjoy these vivid colors in a believably natural finish and convenient packaging, then I have a feeling this could be a great option for you. Even I, a wearer of beige, was able to make every single one of these colors work, despite the fact that I don't typically gravitate towards saturated colors like this. That being said, how many of us have one or two favorite blush colors that we tend to gravitate towards day in, day out, and we only very rarely go for other colors? If that's the case, then an entire blush palette might not be great. But if you happen to really like 2 or maybe even 3 of these colors, perhaps a palette like this would be good because you'd have the colors you reach for day to day with a couple of extra additions just in case the mood hit. Especially because I assume that ESUM will be coming out with replacement pans of these colors, so you would be able to easily replace the colors you use most. I do think that this blush palette could potentially be very user-friendly for everyday makeup users as long as you gravitate to these kinds of vivid colors. Simply because the formula is so nice, you can really easily build it from very sheer, just a veil of color, to a very present color on the face. But if you, like me, tend to gravitate towards less saturated colors, or if you're the type of person who only really wears 1 or 2 blush colors, then I don't think a palette like this would be for you, just because it would be overkill, both in the amount of blushes you get and also the saturation of the color. There's just a lot of punch here to be had. Even if the pigmentation isn't in your face, these colors are very poppy. They draw attention. They're very apparent. So as obsessed as I am with makeup, I don't know that a palette like this is for me. But the friend of mine who lent this to me often wears very vivid colors on her lips and cheeks. So I can see why she's so happy with this palette, despite the fact that she's just an everyday makeup wearer and not a makeup artist, because colors like this just really suit her. She also adores lip palettes, and she gets a lot of use out of them. She's a huge fan of this palette, and I can definitely see why. After experimenting with the colors and the formula, it's comfortable to wear, it gives great longevity, the color options are beautiful. It's a great way to mix and match, create ombre looks. It's just a very useful palette. On a personal level, I really enjoyed my time with these. And although none of them was impressive enough to make me run out and purchase them immediately, I would consider purchasing the lip palette and maybe some of the liners if I happened to run out of what I already had and had a need for something like a lip palette, which has happened in the past, and I could imagine happening again. The one thing I don't think I would purchase would be the blush palette, simply because I don't tend to gravitate towards these vivid colors. If you found this review helpful or interesting, I hope that you'll give it a thumbs up to let me know, and of course ask any questions you might have in the comments. And if you generally enjoy makeup reviews, discussions of what's new on the market, and just talking about style in general, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Thanks for tuning in. I do hope that you'll say hi in the comments, but even if you don't, I hope you have a wonderful week, and we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.